Boy abandoned in the mountains grows up with his dog. Together they build a paradise cabin. Noah's breath came out in short, nervous puffs, misting in the cold air as the rusty pickup disappeared down the dirt road. The last crunch of gravel under its tires echoed like a slammed door to a life that was no longer his. He was 13, maybe. He had stopped keeping track around his 10th birthday when his father stopped pretending to care. His jeans were too short, his jacket had more holes than warmth, and the only things he carried were a torn backpack, a half-empty can of beans, and an old, wrinkled photo of a woman with soft eyes. His mother, maybe. He never knew for sure. But beside him, standing still as a soldier, was the last thing his father had ever cared about. Rust, a bloodhound mix with drooping ears and eyes that had seen too much. His muzzle was grey, his joints stiff with age, but he stood like a statue, watching the horizon even after the truck was long gone. "Go," Noah whispered, his voice cracking. He gave a weak nudge to the dog's side. "Go on, he's your owner. I'm not." Russ didn't move. "Please," Noah said again, this time more to himself than the dog. Still the dog stayed. Noah dropped to the dirt. It was mid-autumn in the Montana backwoods, and already the trees were bare. The cold bit through his threadbare jacket like teeth. He tucked his arms around his knees, trying to make himself disappear. Rust finally moved, but not away. The old hound curled beside him, pressing his warm body against the boy's side. Noah flinched at first, unsure of the gesture, then slowly leaned in. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't completely alone. They stayed that way until the light died behind the ridgeline and the sky turned bruised purple. Coyotes called from somewhere farther up the slope, and Noah stiffened. He had no flashlight, no phone, and no clue where the nearest town was. All he had was the dog. And maybe that would have to be enough. The first night was survival by instinct. They found a hollow between two rocks, shielded from the wind. Rust lay across the entrance, his body a barrier between the boy and the world. At one point, when a branch snapped nearby, Rust let out a low, guttural growl. Not loud, not showy. Just enough to let whatever was out there know. He was still dangerous. The next morning, Noah woke to the smell of wet leaves and the sound of sniffing. Rust was already up, nose low to the ground, tail stiff. He looked back at Noah and barked once, short, commanding. "What?" Noah croaked. The dog barked again, then trotted forward. With nothing else to do and nowhere else to go, Noah followed. They walked for hours, through brambles, across shallow streams, along deer trails so narrow they had to move single file. Rust was methodical, occasionally pausing to look back and make sure the boy kept up. His nose was always working, always reading the ground. By midday, they reached the edge of a small clearing. An old hunter's cabin, half-rotted and leaning to one side, sat like a secret waiting to be rediscovered. Noah stared at it, blinking in disbelief. Did you know this was here?" Russ didn't answer, of course, but the way he sat and looked back at Noah made it feel like yes. Inside, the place was a mess. Spiderwebs, broken windows, and mouldy furniture. But there was a cast-iron stove still intact. There were walls. There was shelter. It was a start. Over the next few days they settled into something like rhythm. Noah used a broken broom to clear out the debris. Rust hunted. Small game mostly, squirrels and the occasional rabbit. The first time Rust brought back a kill, Noah hesitated. Then he lit a fire and cooked it, whispering, "Thanks," before they shared the meal in silence. At night the boy would sit with the old dog, staring into the firelight, letting the warmth soak into his bones. He didn't talk much, not out loud, but sometimes Rust would rest his head on Noah's knee, like he understood every word not spoken. A week passed, then 2. Noah stopped waiting for someone to come looking. He started learning the woods instead. Rust taught him, in ways the boy couldn't put into words, which berries not to eat, which animal tracks to follow, how to move with the wind, not against it. But it was the 3rd week when Noah finally asked the question, "Why'd you stay with me?" They were sitting on a rock near the river, sun warming their backs. Rust turned his head, nose twitching, then slowly pressed it to Noah's hand. And for a moment, something clicked inside the boy. Some deep, quiet truth. This dog hadn't just stayed. He had chosen him. That night, Noah took the old photo of the woman out of his backpack and set it on the shelf above the stove. Then he took off his jacket, the last thing that smelled like the life he'd left behind, and tossed it into the fire. Rust came over and dropped something at his feet, a pine cone, chewed and muddy. Noah laughed. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning of a new life. One built not on what they'd lost, but what they still had, each other. The first morning alone in the mountains was colder than any night before it. Noah awoke curled beside Rust under a thin mylar blanket his father had tossed in the pack. Frost laced the brim of his wool cap, and his fingers felt like stiff twigs as he tried to move. Rust rose slowly, his joints creaking, but his eyes stayed alert, scanning, listening, always watching Noah. Their shelter for the night had been a crude lean-to beneath an outcrop of rock. Branches snapped from pine trees, layered with fir needles, and packed with snow for insulation. It wasn't much, but it had kept them alive. Barely. Noah sat up, teeth chattering. "We need food," he muttered. Rust gave a low whuff, the breath fogging in the cold. Then he trotted ahead a few steps, nose to the ground, tail low, but moving. A signal that Noah quickly learned meant, "Follow me." They moved in silence through the snow-draped woods. Rust led them down a winding slope, past birch trees stripped bare, and across a frozen stream where the ice groaned beneath Noah's boots. Tracks appeared, hoofprints, staggered and sharp. Deer. Noah stopped beside them, squinting. He wasn't a hunter. He was just a boy with a pocket knife, 2 granola bars left, and the kind of fear that didn't let you cry because crying wasted energy. Rust sniffed the trail and looked back. Noah followed. Hours passed. They didn't catch the deer, but Rust led them to a broken-down trapper's shack, long forgotten in a hollow behind a ridge. Its roof had caved in on one side, but inside they found an old tin box beneath a loose floorboard. Inside were 2 rusted fishing hooks, 3 .22 rounds with corrosion on the tips, a flint striker, and, wrapped in wax paper, a dried piece of jerky so tough it cracked when Noah bent it. They shared it anyway, half for Rust, half for him. Later, Noah used the hooks to rig a line with paracord and a soda tab. He remembered watching a YouTube video about ice fishing before the world went quiet, before his mum died, before the bottle took his dad. He chipped a hole in the frozen stream and waited. Rust sat beside him, eyes half-lidded, but ears still tuned to every snap of twig. They caught nothing that day, but they stayed warm. They were learning. That night, in the collapsed shack with a fire of pine cones and sapwood crackling in an old coffee can, Noah opened his tin treasure again. Inside was a folded photo of a woman smiling wide at the camera, wind-blown hair and eyes that looked just like his. His mom. He hadn't meant to cry, but when Rust gently placed his head on Noah's lap, the tears came without shame. "She used to say the woods were magic," Noah whispered. "Said they could heal broken things." Rust thumped his tail once, not in agreement, just presence, and sometimes that was enough. The next morning, they tracked the deer again. Noah made a snare with bent branches and Rust's leash. They didn't catch the deer, but they caught a rabbit by accident. Noah apologized as he cooked it. He whispered thanks before eating, because his mother would have told him to. By the third week, Noah could light a fire without swearing. He could read tracks, predict the wind, and find water even under snow. Rust taught him how to listen with his whole body. They built a new shelter, not just a lean-to, but a proper A-frame, roof of pine boughs, sides braced with fallen logs. Noah carved his initials and Rust's on the post with the tip of a nail. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Sometimes at night, the wind howled like a scream, and Noah would wake in a panic. But Rust was always there, watching, guarding, never leaving. One day they found cougar scat near their trail. Noah froze. Rust lowered his head and growled low. Not a bark, not a whine, a warning. They turned back. That night they moved their shelter farther uphill. Noah didn't sleep. Neither did Rust. It wasn't survival anymore. It was trust. And something stronger. By the end of the month, Noah didn't just feel safer in the woods. He felt like he belonged. The forest wasn't his enemy, it was his ally. It taught him to be quiet, to respect silence, to move without crashing through life. One morning, they stood on the ridge above the valley. The snow was starting to melt. Noah looked at Rust, scratched the old dog behind the ears, and said quietly, "Let's build something better, something we've never had." Rust barked once, and that was the plan. A cabin, not just to survive, but to live, together. It started snowing again, harder than before. Thick, wet flakes fell in frantic bursts, smothering the ground, erasing the trail behind them. The wind didn't whisper through the trees. It howled like something wounded, something ancient. Noah's face stung with every gust. His gloves, once dry, were soaked through. Each breath felt like inhaling knives. "Rust," he chattered. "We need to stop. We need somewhere." Rust didn't look back. The old dog kept moving, slow but steady, weaving through trees, stepping with care even as the world disappeared under white. Noah followed because there wasn't any other option. He couldn't tell direction anymore, not by the trees, not by the light. The storm had swallowed it all. Then Rust stopped. At first Noah thought it was another thicket, but as he stepped closer, he saw the black curve of stone carved into the side of the hill. A cave, or something close to it. The entrance was half hidden by snowdrifts and fallen branches, but wide enough for Rust to squeeze through without hesitation. Noah hesitated only a second. Then he dropped to his knees and crawled in after him. Inside, it was dark, but the howling wind dulled to a distant moan. The cold still clung to them, but it no longer bit into the skin. The space smelled of damp earth and old moss, and it was deeper than he expected, tall enough for Noah to sit upright. Rust shook off the snow, then turned to nudge Noah with his nose. A soft, urgent nudge. "I'm okay," Noah murmured, voice thin from cold. "We're okay." They weren't. Not yet. But inside that hollow, something shifted. It wasn't home, but it wasn't nothing either. He gathered twigs and pine cones from his pack, precious cargo scavenged days ago. He dug a shallow pit into the dirt and used the striker from the tin box. It took too long. His fingers barely worked, but finally flame bloomed, small, stubborn, and alive. Rust curled beside him as Noah wrapped them both in the old emergency blanket, now frayed along one edge. He pressed his back against the dog's thick fur and felt a warmth that wasn't just from the fire. Rust's ribs moved steadily. His breath was slow, grounding, like a metronome keeping time in a life that had gone chaotic. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, two souls sat close, breathing, enduring. Noah didn't remember falling asleep, only waking hours later to silence. Not total, but softer, the kind of hush that comes when snow blankets everything. The fire had died, but the embers still glowed. Rust hadn't moved. His body curled protectively around Noah's legs. That was the first time Noah let himself really rest. Not the kind of sleep where one eye stayed half open. This was surrender. Later that week, after the snow stopped, they returned to the cave again. And again. It became more than shelter. It became a pattern, a habit, a place to dry boots, to plan routes, to wait out the sudden sleet storms that rolled down the peaks with no warning. Noah reinforced the entrance with stacked stones. He crafted a crude windbreak from branches and rope. Inside, he scratched their initials into the wall with a pocket knife. N and R, simple, solid, a mark that said, "We were here. We made it." One night, while the fire cracked and Rust dozed with his head in Noah's lap, Noah whispered, "I don't think I've ever had a place that felt this mine." Rust's ear twitched. He didn't lift his head, but his tail thumped twice. Not an answer. A presence. That same night, a sound startled them both awake. Not the wind, not the trees, footsteps, human. Noah grabbed his knife without thinking. Rust stood, ears high, body stiff. His growl was low, rumbling. Not loud, but meant for warning. They waited. The footsteps came closer, crunching over the snow, slow and deliberate. Then they stopped and turned away. Rust held still for another full minute before relaxing. Noah didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, he found new boot prints in the snow. Deep, heavy, headed downhill. Someone else was out here, and they knew where the cave was. But Noah wasn't afraid, not completely, not anymore, because now he had shelter. He had a fire, he had Rust. And that night, for the first time, Rust pressed his forehead into Noah's chest, one strong, brief nudge, and let out a long, quiet sigh. It wasn't just comfort. It was a promise. The storm didn't announce itself this time. It came fast, like the mountain had been holding its breath for too long and suddenly exhaled in fury. Noah had just finished stacking the last row of logs against the cave wall, a crude but sturdy frame that he called their cabin. Rust was outside, circling the entrance, nose twitching against the rising wind. The air smelled different, damp, metallic and heavy, the way it does before something breaks. "Come on, Rust," Noah called, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Let's ride this one out inside." Rust didn't move. His head was high, ears turning toward the ridge above them. A low rumble trembled through the ground. Not thunder, deeper, closer. Then the world shifted. The sound came like a roar, earth tearing, stones sliding, trees cracking under their own roots. Noah didn't have time to think. Rust lunged, shoving him backward just as the first cascade of rock thundered down from the slope. The boy stumbled, hit the dirt, and the entrance to their cave vanished in an explosion of dust and snow. He coughed hard, eyes burning. "Rust!" Nothing. He scrambled to his feet, clawing at the debris, pushing aside slabs of rock with raw hands. "Rust!" he screamed again. A muffled whimper answered from beneath the rubble. Noah's stomach dropped. He didn't think, he dug. Stones tore skin, nails split, his breath came in ragged gasps. Every sound outside was muffled, like the world had been wrapped in cotton. The only thing real was that faint, desperate sound beneath the rocks. When he finally uncovered a gap, Rust's paw pushed through, dirt-caked, trembling, but alive. "Oh God, hang on, buddy, I'm here." It took nearly an hour to free him. When Rust finally wriggled out, he was limping, his back leg twisted awkwardly, blood matting the fur around his flank. But he stood. He always stood. Noah fell to his knees beside him, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. "I thought I lost you. I thought—" The words dissolved into shaking breaths. "You can't leave me too." Rust leaned into him, body heavy but solid, grounding him in that moment the way no human ever had. His fur was damp, warm under Noah's frozen fingers. The dog's head rested on the boy's shoulder for just a second, long enough to remind him what survival really felt like. Outside, the mountain moaned again. More debris shifted somewhere up the ridge. The cave was half collapsed, its walls cracked and unstable. They had to move. Noah wiped his eyes roughly with his sleeve. "Come on, we're not dying here." He tore a strip from his blanket, tied it around Rust's injured leg, and shouldered his pack. Step by step, they crawled out through a narrow gap in the fallen rock, the storm battering their faces as they emerged into open air. The sky was bruised grey, snow whipping sideways, turning the forest into a blur. Everything they'd built, the shelter, the small wall, the stacked wood, was gone. Rust limped to where the cabin had stood and sniffed the rubble. Then he sat, tail tucked, chest rising and falling slow but steady. Noah stood beside him, numb. "It's all gone." Rust turned his head, eyes meeting his. There was no fear in them, just endurance, that same quiet, unshakable loyalty that had saved Noah more times than he deserved. Noah let out a short, bitter laugh that cracked halfway through. "You're crazy, you know that. You should have run." Rust blinked, unmoved. Snow gathered on Noah's shoulders. He looked around at the ruin of their home, the raw earth exposed, the broken logs like bones jutting through ice. And then, for reasons he couldn't explain, he smiled. "All right," he whispered. "Then we start. Again." He dragged what wood he could salvage into a small pile near a rock ledge. He lit the fire with trembling hands, shielding the flame from the wind until it caught. Rust curled near the edge, shivering but awake, eyes fixed on Noah. That night, as the snow softened and the wind died down, Noah sat beside him, wrapped in the blanket they had shared since the first night in the woods. His hands rested gently on Rust's back, feeling the faint rise and fall of breath. "I used to think family was something you were born with," Noah said quietly. "But maybe it's just whoever stays." Rust exhaled softly, the sound halfway between a sigh and a hum. His tail brushed against Noah's leg once, slow, deliberate. Outside, the mountain finally went still. Inside that flicker of light and silence, boy and dog sat side by side, broken, battered, but unyielding. And when the dawn finally came, it didn't bring peace. It brought purpose. The storm passed in silence, leaving behind a world hollowed out by rage. The trees stood stripped and leaning. The snow wore a coat of ash. And the cabin Noah had once called home was now a twisted graveyard of splinters and stone. But in the wreckage, something gleamed. Noah found it wedged beneath a blackened beam, a hammer. Its handle was scorched but intact. The metal head, aged and scratched, bore the initials TM burned faintly into one side. His father's initials. It was the only thing left that hadn't shattered. He stared at it for a long time, fingers trembling before they closed around the grip. It felt heavier than he remembered. Or maybe he was just more tired now. Behind him, Rust limped toward the remains of the shelter, sniffing around the perimeter. He hadn't left Noah's side all night, even when his own body begged to rest. His injured leg dragged in the snow, but his eyes were bright, watchful, alert, unbroken. Noah knelt next to him. "We still got this, huh?" Rust didn't wag his tail. He just looked at Noah like he always did, like he was enough. That was the first day of the rebuild. There were no blueprints, no perfect plans, just 2 survivors and a hammer. Noah started by clearing debris, one jagged beam at a time. His hands blistered fast, then calloused. Every plank he moved revealed another memory buried beneath. The burnt edge of his sleeping bag, the twisted rim of the pot he once cooked in, a water canteen split down the middle. All useless now. But the hammer wasn't. With each swing into the frozen earth, Noah could feel the rhythm returning, like the beat of something alive inside him. He wasn't rebuilding a cabin. He was proving something to the mountain, to the silence, to the weight inside his chest. "I'm still here," he muttered with every strike. "I'm still here." Rust became his shadow. When Noah dug out the foundation, Rust guarded the edge. When he scavenged timber from fallen trees, Rust followed. One afternoon, Noah heard a low growl behind him and turned to find Rust standing stiff-legged in front of a fox, sniffing their meager food pile. The fox backed down. Rust didn't chase it. He just stayed still, planted like a sentinel. That night, Noah built the first wall. It wasn't perfect. The boards leaned, the nails bent. But it stood. He stepped back and looked at it under the glow of a flickering fire. "Looks like a drunk moose tried carpentry," he said aloud. Rust tilted his head. Noah smirked. Yeah, I'll fix it." The second wall came faster. Then a roof frame, rough and crooked but solid enough to hold a tarp. Snow still found its way through the edges, but it was shelter. It was something. By the end of the week, he had a square-shaped skeleton of a cabin and a deep ache in every part of his body. He collapsed one evening beside Rust, their backs against the new wall, the fire casting shadows across their faces. Smoke from the green pine made his eyes sting. Or maybe it wasn't the smoke. "You know," Noah whispered. "They said I wouldn't make it. Said I'd crack in a week out here." Rust let out a soft, low exhale. His head pressed against Noah's knee. "I don't want to just survive anymore," Noah continued. "I want to live. I want this to be mine. Not because I ran from something, but because I built it." Somewhere in the trees, an owl called out. The wind had softened, no longer screaming, just whispering. It was the first night Noah didn't feel like the forest wanted him gone. He reached over, resting a hand gently on Rust's head. "You didn't give up on me. I won't give up on this." But just as the words settled between them, Rust jolted upright. Noah froze. The dog's ears were rigid. He faced the dark tree line, his nose working fast. Then came the bark. Not a frantic warning, but a sharp, purposeful sound. Noah grabbed the hammer and rose to his feet. "What is it?" There, near the ridge, something moved. He saw it just before it vanished. A figure. Human. Watching. Noah's heart slammed against his ribs. "We're not alone anymore." He didn't chase. He didn't call out. He just stood, breath held, while Rust growled low in his throat. It wasn't over. Not yet. But this time, he wasn't scared. Not with a hammer in his hand, a dog at his side, and a cabin rising from the ashes. This time, he was ready. The morning mist clung low to the valley, softening the sharp edges of the trees and muffling every sound. Noah moved slowly, dragging a bundle of wet pine branches behind him, boots crunching over thin snow. He wasn't hunting, just scavenging firewood before the next storm rolled in. Rust trotted ahead, nose to the wind, body relaxed but alert. The rebuilt cabin behind them wasn't finished. Patchy roof, no chimney, drafty walls, but it was home. And in the wild, even a flawed shelter could mean the difference between life and death. As they neared the creek, Rust suddenly froze. Noah dropped the branches and reached for the hatchet on his belt. "What is it, boy?" Rust didn't growl, didn't bark. He took 2 cautious steps forward, then let out a low chuff, soft, uncertain. Noah followed his gaze. Across the stream, half obscured by a thicket of spruce, stood a man. Old, lean, dressed in a patchwork coat of worn flannel and leather. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed most of his face, but his posture was wary, like someone used to being left alone, and ready to fight if not. Noah raised both hands, palms open. "We're not looking for trouble." The man said nothing. Rust stepped into the water, tail wagging once, just once, then sank down onto his belly on the opposite bank. Submissive, but not afraid. Noah blinked. "Rust, what are you doing?" The old man finally spoke. His voice was rough as gravel but calm. "That dog's seen things." Noah nodded. "So have I." The man squinted, assessing. "Name's Hank." "Noah." They didn't shake hands. Hank jerked his chin toward the sky. "Storm's coming. Wind's shifted. You got a real roof yet?" "Working on it." "Then you're working too slow." That was how it started. Hank didn't offer help. He just showed up the next morning with a bundle of cedar slats and a small saw, stood beside the cabin without a word, and started sawing. Noah watched, uncertain whether to stop him or thank him. Rust sat quietly nearby, eyes moving between the two men like he was refereeing. By noon, the front edge of the roof was tighter, slanted, and ready for runoff. Rain wouldn't pour straight inside anymore. "Your ridge beam's off by 2 degrees. Hank muttered. Noah frowned. "You just got here. How do you know that?" "Because I lived through 3 winters with a roof off by 1. He said it like a man who knew the price of getting things wrong. Every day after that, Hank appeared near the stream around sunrise. He never crossed the line between invitation and intrusion. He worked in silence, showed Noah how to split greenwood without losing fingers, how to angle the rafters for meltwater, how to stack a fire that breathed instead of smoked. And Noah, he watched, he mimicked, he learned. Hank never asked questions. Not about the burn marks on the tools or the silence in Noah's eyes. Not about Rust's half-healed limp, or the fact that Noah sometimes woke screaming from dreams he didn't remember. But he noticed everything. Once, when a windstorm snapped a pine tree and 1/2 mile out, Noah panicked, grabbed his gear, yelled for Rust, prepared to flee. Hank didn't say a word, just pointed to a hollow under the hill and said, "Safe there, let it pass." They waited it out in silence, Noah shivering with adrenaline, Rust pressed against his side. Later that night, Hank handed Noah a box of old matches wrapped in waxed cloth. "Found 'em in the back of my shed," he said. "Used to be a fire jumper. Can't. Save what you built if you don't know how to keep the fire alive." Noah didn't know how to thank him, so he didn't try. He just lit a flame and let it warm the cabin they rebuilt together. But not everything about Hank made sense. He never spoke of a family, yet sometimes paused near the ridge at dusk like he was waiting for someone. Once, Noah spotted him holding a small, hand-carved pendant, rubbing it with his thumb before slipping it back into his coat. Rust, strangely, never barked at Hank, never challenged him. In fact, from the first moment, Rust treated the man not like a stranger, but like someone he'd known before. One evening, after they'd fixed the south wall, Hank sat on a stump by the fire. "You ever wonder," he said quietly, "why a dog trusts some men before they've earned it?" Noah hesitated. "I've seen Rust snap at people who smiled, and lie down for people who scowled. I don't think it's about kindness." Hank nodded slowly. "It's about truth. Dogs don't care about your mask. They smell who you really are." Noah stared into the fire. "Then maybe that's why Rust followed me." "Or maybe," Hank said, his voice almost a whisper, "he was sent to find you." For a long moment, the forest held its breath. Then Hank rose. "Storm'll be worse than the last. Batten everything down, and for God's sake, check the chimney draft." The next morning he was gone. No footprints, no fire pit smoke, no sign of where he'd gone or when he'd left. Rust stood by the stream for an hour, staring into the woods, ears tilted, not tense, just listening. Noah didn't call him back. Sometimes the forest gives you what you need. Not what you want, not what you're ready for, but exactly what will keep you going. Noah looked at the hammer on the porch, at the new roof catching the morning light, at the fire still burning in the hearth, then at Rust. "Come on," he said. "We've got work to finish." The sky turned copper by mid-afternoon. It was subtle at first, a strange stillness in the treetops, a scent like scorched cedar drifting in with the wind. Then the low rumble, like distant thunder, but steadier, meaner. Noah dropped the axe and looked up. A hawk burst from the ridge, winging hard east. Rust, who had been lounging near the split wood pile, rose to his feet and stared into the valley like he already knew. Noah's heart kicked against his ribs. He bolted to the bluff overlooking the basin. What he saw made the blood drain from his face. A wall of smoke, thick, dark, and moving fast, rose like a tidal wave over the treetops. The fire wasn't crawling, it was running. "Rust!" he shouted. "Cabin, go!" The dog hesitated, ears flicking, then lunged ahead. They sprinted downhill through the trail they'd worn into the brush weeks before. Pine cones cracked underfoot. A dry branch snapped in the distance, followed by a loud whoosh. A gust of hot wind slapped Noah, sideways. It wasn't just a fire, it was a crown fire, traveling above the canopy, leaping treetop to treetop, sucking the oxygen from the earth. Rust vanished into the trees. "No!" Noah screamed. "Come back!" But Rust didn't return. Smoke coiled low across the clearing by the stream. Embers skittered like red insects. The cabin, half finished but solid, stood alone in the valley, square in the fire's projected path. Noah ran. He didn't think. He didn't yell. His body simply moved, vaulting fallen logs, dodging low branches, mind locked on one word. Rust. As he reached the cabin, heat slammed into him like a truck. His eyes burned. He pulled his flannel up over his mouth and kicked open the door. "Rust!" he coughed. Silence. Then, scratching. From beneath the workbench. Noah dropped to his knees and yanked back a canvas tarp. Rust was curled beneath, trembling, eyes wide but focused. His front paw was caught between two split planks, wedged into a knothole. "Hold still," Noah rasped. He worked his fingers under the paw, twisted gently. Rust whined but didn't snap. Didn't move. Trusted. With one final tug, the paw came free. Then the world roared. A branch exploded just outside the window, spraying the wall with sparks. The smoke turned white-hot. The flames were here. Noah slung the 60-pound shepherd over his shoulders. Rust didn't fight it. He hung like a pack, head pressed into Noah's back, legs limp, breath coming in shallow huffs. Noah kicked the door open and charged into the smoke. Visibility dropped to inches. The air turned liquid with heat. Every breath was a war. The only path was forward, toward the ridge Hank had cleared months ago, toward the firebreak line. Trees cracked, flames leapt across the ground behind them. Noah's boots slipped on ash. His arms burned. Rust's weight nearly crushed his spine. But he didn't stop. At the top of the ridge, figures moved, firefighters in yellow suits, axes in hand, eyes wide as they saw what came stumbling through the smoke. A man, soaked in sweat and soot, carrying a burned dog like a wounded soldier. Hank stood among them, holding a fire rake. His jaw dropped. For a moment, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Noah collapsed at their feet, lungs screaming, eyes watering. Rust tumbled from his shoulders onto the dirt, letting out a rough, broken cough, but his tail thumped twice against the ground. The firefighters surrounded them. One knelt to check Rust's breathing. Another offered Noah a water bottle, which he barely managed to raise. A captain leaned over. "You came through the southern flank?" Noah nodded, still gasping. "That's suicide. Fire ate that section 20 minutes ago." Noah looked back. Black smoke now swallowed the entire valley. His cabin, the stream, everything. Gone, except for Rust. Rust, who had stayed behind, who hadn't barked, hadn't run, who had waited. "You should have left him," one of the rookies muttered. "Just a dog." Hank turned, slow and deliberate. His voice dropped into something sharp. "That dog saved his life more times than you'll ever count, and today he paid it back." Noah reached out and touched Rust's side. The fur was scorched in places. His pads were raw, but his eyes were open, locked onto Noah's with a look not of pain, but of quiet defiance. "I wouldn't have made it without him," Noah said hoarsely. Hank crouched beside them. "Neither would I. 20 years ago, different fire, different dog, but same eyes." The group fell silent. The fire raged behind them, but for a moment no one moved. No one spoke. Just a burned soldier and his dog, alive in the ash. Rust lifted his head slightly, then rested it on Noah's leg. Not out of weakness, but because he could finally rest. They sat like that until the fire passed. And even then, Noah didn't let go. The fire line had passed, but the scars stayed. Weeks later, Noah stood where the cabin used to be whole. The south wall had collapsed. Smoke had blackened the rafters. The handmade kitchen table was a pile of charcoal beneath the open sky. But the old stone hearth still stood. A strange comfort, like the spine of something that refused to die. He didn't rebuild right away. For days, he and Rust walked the charred valley in silence. A strange stillness lingered, as if the forest was holding its breath. Pines that once sang in the wind now stood like skeletons, stripped bare and humming with ghosts. Rust didn't limp anymore, but his gait was slower. His eyes, though, still razor-sharp, watching every hawk, every shadow, every change in the wind. Hank returned just once after the fire. He brought fresh timber, a tin of nails, and a cooler of beer. They didn't speak about the night of the rescue. They just worked side by side, rebuilding the porch one plank at a time. On the last evening of that visit, Hank stood at the edge of the bluff, looking down into the basin that now stretched wide and exposed. "I've seen men die less bravely than that dog," he muttered, almost to himself. Noah didn't respond. He was too busy watching Rust, who sat at the porch's edge like a statue, nose to the wind. 2 weeks later, Hank was gone. Cardiac arrest in his sleep. No drama, no calls, just a neighbor who knocked, then silence. Noah got the news in town. Sheriff Tucker handed him the envelope. Hank's will. "You were the only one on it," the sheriff said. Inside, 2 lines scribbled on yellow legal paper. "The forest is yours now. Teach it to someone who listens. And keep that damn dog out of the whiskey." Noah stared at the paper for a long time, then folded it neatly and slid it into his back pocket. That night, he didn't sleep. The wind had changed. He stepped out barefoot into the ash-covered dirt and looked across the clearing. The moon cast a silver light over what remained of the cabin. Rust lay curled on the new porch, his ears twitching, eyes half closed, but not asleep. He lifted his head as Noah approached. For a long time, neither moved. Then Noah sat beside him, back against the beam, and whispered, "You knew, didn't you, before I did?" Rust didn't blink, just rested his head back down and closed his eyes. They kept the silence between them, a soft, respectful space where grief could breathe. Spring came, and the green crept back. Little shoots pushed through the blackened soil. Woodpeckers returned. Deer tiptoed into the clearing again. The cabin stayed half-burned for a while. Noah didn't have the heart to fully rebuild. He fixed only what needed fixing. Left the charred beams as they were. A reminder. A testament. He built a bench facing the lake, with a small wooden sign that read, "Some things stand because others stayed." Rust took to lying there every evening, facing the water as the light turned gold, even as his legs stiffened, even as his muzzle turned white. Sometimes Noah would sit beside him, silent. Other times he'd read aloud. Old books, Hank's notes, his own scribbles. One evening thunder rumbled far off. Noah turned to head inside. Rust didn't follow. The old shepherd just blinked at the lake, ears barely twitching, calm as ever. Noah paused at the doorway. "You coming?" Rust stayed. Noah watched him for a moment, then nodded once. "All right, hold the line." Inside, he brewed coffee and waited. The storm passed without much fuss, just a flash of lightning and the smell of rain on soot. When Noah stepped back outside, Rust was exactly where he'd been. Eyes closed, breathing slow. He looked like part of the porch. Still there, still guarding. Days turned to months. Visitors started coming, students, hikers, the occasional veteran who'd heard rumors of the ex-firefighter with the burned cabin and the soldier dog. Noah didn't say much. Rust didn't need to. His presence said enough. The forest healed slower than the people. But it healed. Bit by bit. Bark returned to trunks. Birds rebuilt nests. Life came back. And Rust watched it all, until the day his legs no longer let him rise. He didn't whine, didn't cry, just blinked up at Noah, calm as ever, and waited. Noah didn't speak. Just knelt beside him, one hand resting gently on the scarred fur between Rust's shoulders. The lake shimmered gold. A hawk cried in the distance. And when Rust finally closed his eyes for the last time, the wind stirred the porch gently, as if bowing. Noah sat there long after the sun fell. He didn't move, didn't need to, because something still stood, something still guarded, and always would. The day after Rust was buried, Noah woke before dawn. Not from grief, from purpose. He didn't explain it to anyone, he didn't have to. But something shifted the moment he placed that final stone atop the small mound behind the cabin, Rust's resting place, beneath the pine tree where he used to sit for hours, guarding the lake with a stillness that no human could hold. The air was clearer now, and louder somehow. The forest was healing. But so was he. And healing, he decided, wasn't something to keep to yourself. He started with the porch. Boards were replaced, but not sanded smooth. He kept the knots, the splinters. They felt honest. The roof came next. Then the back room that had caved in during the fire. He turned it into a long, open bunk room. At first it was just one kid. A boy from a neighboring town, maybe 12, with a busted lip and a silence that hit Noah right in the gut. Sheriff Tucker brought him by one night, said nothing, just gave a nod and drove off. Noah showed the boy where the blankets were. Didn't ask questions, didn't need to. The boy stayed 3 weeks. Then one day he was gone. But he left behind a drawing nailed to the bunk wall. A stick-figure man with a big square dog standing on a hill. The next month, a girl showed up. Then 2 more. Word got out. Not through the internet or signs. Just whispers between tired teachers, quiet cops, and the kind of nurses who still believed in second chances. They came with nothing. And they brought nothing but stories written in their eyes. Noah never asked them to speak. But eventually most did. The cabin became something new, not a monument to the past, but a shelter for what could still be saved. He called it Rust's Watch, a name that made more than one old ranger nod and wipe something from their eye. Each night, Noah would sit on the porch with whoever needed company. he'd tell pieces of his story. Not the gory parts, not the fire or the violence or the nights when he'd wanted to give up, but the parts about Rust, about a dog who had no reason to trust but did anyway, who didn't leave, even when it would have been easier, who stayed. They listened, and somewhere between those stories something began to shift. Some started helping in the garden, others built their own benches, carved names into the wood. A few of the older ones began working on a walking trail through the forest, mapped and marked with wooden signs etched by hand. On each sign they added something small, a paw print, Rust's, not painted, branded, burned into the wood. Noah never told them to do it. They just did. The biggest change came that fall. A van pulled up one evening. Out stepped a woman in her late 50s, sharp eyes, neat clothes, and a notebook so full its spine had given up. Her name was Dr. Eliza Mendez, a social worker from the capital. She walked the cabin, took photos, talked to the kids, ate stew from a chipped blue bowl, and watched the way Noah didn't try to lead. Just listened. That night she sat beside him on the porch. "Do you even realize what you've built?" she asked. Noah shrugged. "Just giving them what I didn't get when I needed it." She stared at the stars for a long time. Then finally said, "I think you're going to need more beds." By winter, the cabin was registered as an independent trauma shelter. Volunteers started trickling in, nurses, veterans, carpenters, even a former canine handler who'd lost his own partner in a bombing years back. He didn't say much either, but when he saw the small wooden plaque that read Rust's Watch, he took off his cap, pressed it to his chest, and stood there a long time. Noah didn't cry, but his hand rested on the old bench, the one Rust used to lie beside. Snow began to fall, quiet, gentle. Inside, laughter spilled from the bunkroom. Someone had found Hank's old banjo. It was badly tuned. The notes were a mess, but they were loud, alive. In the garden, someone had placed a new sign, carved by hand, crooked letters, but deep and proud. It said, "He guarded us when no one else did." Rust was gone, but he was everywhere. In the footsteps that now ran across the porch, in the whisper of the wind that curled through the pine, and in the eyes of every child who walked in thinking they had no one left, only to realize they had already been seen, already been protected, already been welcomed home. It happened on a Tuesday morning. No thunder, no storm, just the steady rise of sun behind the trees and the sound of boots brushing against pine needles as Noah stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs in hand, one for himself, one for habit. Rust wasn't by the door. That alone told Noah something was off. He found him in the corner of the cabin, curled on the old braided rug they'd hauled back from a junk shop 3 winters ago. The big shepherd's breathing was soft, but shallow. His eyes were open, barely. Noah sank to his knees beside him. Rust lifted his head, just enough to nudge Noah's wrist, then rested it across his leg. That was how he went. No howling, no last-minute miracle, just breath, then stillness. And weight. Not the kind you can carry, the kind that settles into the cracks of a man's life and never fully leaves. Noah sat there for hours. He didn't move, didn't speak. When one of the kids finally peeked through the cabin door and saw them, he knew. And without needing a word, the whole place grew quiet. Like a flag lowered at half-mast. Rust was gone. But somehow the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, sacred. They buried him under the pine tree, the one that still bore claw marks from the first day Noah had brought him home. The same tree where Rust would sit, watching the road, waiting for whatever or whoever might need protecting. Noah carved the gravestone himself. No dates, just one line. He didn't bark for help. He barked so no one else would feel alone. They placed his collar in a small glass frame beside the cabin's front door. Not behind it. Right there where the kids would pass every day, where volunteers would pause to rest their hand against the wood, where newcomers, frightened, lost, unsure, would see it first. His name was burned into the leather, still smelled of forest and ash and something else Noah couldn't quite name. Courage, maybe. Rust didn't leave behind medals, no press clippings, no online tribute thread. Just memories. Just change. The kind you can't point to, but you feel every time a scared kid dares to laugh. Every time someone speaks their truth for the first time. Every time Noah catches a glimpse of those brown eyes in another dog. Like Ranger, the shepherd pup a teenage girl named Cass rescued off the highway and brought home last week. She said she felt like she had to. Said she heard barking in her dream the night before. She didn't even know Rust. Not really. But maybe. Maybe she did. Noah still walks the porch every morning. Still carries 2 mugs some days without thinking. He talks to Rust sometimes. Nothing dramatic. Just updates. A story here and there. He tells him about the girl who learned to read under the tree he used to nap beneath. About the kid who fixed the garden fence even after his 5th relapse. About the new volunteers who think they're coming to help, but end up healing themselves. And about the night he couldn't sleep, walked outside, and saw 5 teenagers and a mutt of a Labrador sitting in a circle, telling ghost stories, using Rust's old collar as the talking piece. You couldn't speak unless you were holding it. It was scratched, worn, but still whole.